My name is Lena, and I am 33 years old. I live in Brookfield Hollow with my husband Marcus, our 12-year-old daughter Lucy, and my mother-in-law Helen Turner. On the surface, my life might look steady and safe, but behind every smile, where lies a long history of wounds that were carved into me by the very people who should have protected me the most, my parents. I grew up in a house where love was not divided equally. My younger brother Hunter was the shining star, the golden child who could do no wrong. From the moment he was born, my parents, Frederick and Doris, poured all their attention, all their pride, and all their resources into him. His smallest achievements were celebrated with banners, balloons, and endless praise. When he came home with a school certificate, they treated it like a national award. When he got sick, the whole house revolved around his recovery. To my parents, Hunter was everything. And then there was me. I was the older child, the daughter they never wanted to invest in. My successes were ignored, my struggles dismissed. If I brought home good grades, my parents would glance at the report card and then change the subject. If I needed new shoes or school supplies, I was told to make do. Hunter was handed everything without question, while I had to earn even the smallest necessities through part-time jobs and scholarships. My parents made me feel like a guest in my own home, a burden they wished they didn't have to carry. Even now, as an adult with my own family, those scars have never fully faded. They shaped who I became, strong, independent, but also deeply wounded. I learned early on that if I wanted to survive, I would have to provide for myself. I paid my way through school, fought for opportunities, and taught myself not to expect kindness from my own parents. Instead, I clung to the hope that one day, if I built my own life, I might finally feel the love and security that were denied to me growing up. Marcus was the first person who made me believe that love could be unconditional. He was kind, patient, and supportive in ways that still catch me off guard. When we married, my parents barely attended and gave me nothing, not even a symbolic gift. They sent me away empty-handed, as though my happiness was not worth celebrating. It was humiliating, but Marcus stood by me, holding my hand through the tears. When Lucy was born a year later, I promised myself that no matter what happened, my daughter would never feel the rejection and favoritism that I endured. Lucy is 12 now, and she is the light of my life. She is bright, curious, and braver than she knows. Marcus and Helen have surrounded her with the love and encouragement my parents never gave me. Still, every time I look at her, I feel a quiet ache, a wish that my parents could have loved me the way I love my daughter. As I sit here remembering what happened at my brother Hunter's wedding, I realize how deep those wounds truly run. I thought I had prepared myself for the worst, but nothing could have braced me for what unfolded that night. I had seen favoritism, I had felt neglect, but I never believed it would escalate into violence. Violence so shocking that it still echoes in my mind like a nightmare I cannot wake up from. That night at the wedding, everything came to a breaking point. The favoritism, the humiliation, the unequal treatment, it all erupted in front of a hall full of people. And it ended with my 12-year-old daughter, Lucy, lying on the floor screaming in pain. When I look back at my childhood in Brookfield Hollow, I can still see the sharp contrast in the way my parents treated me and my younger brother Hunter. Our house always looked cheerful from the outside. White picket fence, a carefully trimmed lawn, and a porch where neighbors thought we lived the perfect American dream. But once you stepped inside, the truth was harder to hide. Love was rationed, and I was rarely given my share. Hunter, 5 years younger than me, was the center of our home. When it was his birthday, the house transformed into a carnival. Balloons tied to every chair, cakes stacked high with frosting, piles of presents wrapped in shiny paper. Family, neighbors, even kids from his school were invited. I remember sitting in the corner, watching him unwrap toy after toy, listening to the cheers as he blew out candles. My own birthdays were quiet affairs, if they were acknowledged at all. Sometimes it was just a plain cupcake with one candle and a muttered, "Happy birthday" for my mother, Doris, before she went back to fussing over Hunter. School events were no different. When Hunter joined Little League, my parents bought him the best gear, the newest glove, the shiniest bat, custom shoes. They never missed a game, cheering loudly from the bleachers, their voices proud and booming. But when I had a school recital or an award ceremony, they often didn't show up. If they did, they sat stiffly, hardly clapping. Good, but not great, my father Frederick would say in a flat voice. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't win their approval. The favoritism was so open, so unapologetic, that even relatives noticed. At family gatherings, aunts would whisper, "Poor Lena, she's always left out," but no one dared confront my parents. They had made up their minds early on. Hunter was their legacy, their pride, the child who mattered. I was expected to endure the background, invisible, useful only when chores or responsibilities needed doing. I learned quickly not to ask for things. When my shoes wore thin, I found ways to patch them. When I needed school supplies, I used scraps of paper or borrowed from classmates. Doris would say, "We don't have money for extras," only for me to watch her hand Hunter crisp bills the same afternoon so he could buy snacks or games. My father, Frederick, reinforced the lesson. Hunter is the future of this family. You should be grateful we give you a roof over your head. Gratitude. That was the word they loved to throw at me. I was supposed to be thankful for being ignored, thankful for being pushed aside, thankful for existing in the shadow of their precious son. But instead of breaking me, their neglect taught me something else. It taught me resilience. I became resourceful, independent. I learned to do my own laundry, cook simple meals, and save every coin I earned from babysitting or mowing lawns. Even though I was still a child, I carried the weight of adulthood on my shoulders. While Hunter played carefree in the yard, I was planning how to buy my next notebook. While he laughed in the glow of birthday candles, I was swallowing the bitter taste of being unwanted. That neglect planted a quiet determination inside me. If my parents couldn't love me equally, then I would learn to love myself. If they wouldn't celebrate me, then I would carve out a life where my worth wasn't defined by their blind favoritism. I didn't know it then, but those lonely years were preparing me for the battles I'd face later. The rejection at my wedding, the way they would one day humiliate me at Hunter's celebration, and the violence that would leave scars not only on me but on my daughter. By the time I entered my teenage years, the divide between me and Hunter had grown so wide it felt like a canyon I could never cross. Brookfield Hollow was a small town where reputations mattered, and my parents loved to boast about how promising their son was. Hunter had the newest clothes, a steady flow of pocket money, and the confidence that came with knowing he was cherished. Meanwhile, I was left to figure out how to survive. When I was 14, I got my first part-time job cleaning tables at a local diner. I remember coming home after long shifts smelling of grease and soap, my feet aching, only to hear Hunter whining that he was bored. Doris, my mother, would hand him $20 without hesitation so he could go to the arcade or buy snacks. If I ever asked for even a fraction of that, she would purse her lips and say, "You're old enough to work for what you want, Lena. Don't expect us to hand you things." It wasn't just the money, it was the message. Hunter's desires were seen as needs, while my needs were dismissed as unnecessary wants. When I asked for new shoes because mine had holes in them, Doris shook her head. "Hunter needs cleats for soccer. Those are more important. You'll manage." And so I did. I managed by taping the soles of my sneakers and saving tips from the diner until I could afford a used pair from the thrift shop. The worst part wasn't the lack of money, though. It was the constant comparisons. Doris loved to hold me up against Hunter like a measuring stick I could never meet. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" she would scold whenever I brought home a test score that was anything less than perfect. If Hunter got AB, it was celebrated with ice cream. If I got an A-, she would point to the minus and sigh, "Not good enough, Lena." My father Frederick was no better. He believed girls didn't need much education, only discipline. "Hunter will carry the family name forward," he would say proudly at the dinner table, ruffling Hunter's hair while ignoring me completely. "You'll just get married and be someone else's responsibility." Each time he said it, I felt smaller, like my future had already been written out of existence. I fought back in the only way I could, by working harder. I juggled school with jobs, babysitting, tutoring younger kids, shelving books at the library. I saved every dollar to pay for things other teens took for granted. Prom dresses, school supplies, even college application fees. There were nights I stayed up past midnight studying after a long shift, whispering to myself that I would not let their neglect define me. But no matter how hard I tried, the damage of their words lingered. Doris's voice haunted me. "You'll never be as good as Hunter." I began to believe it sometimes, to wonder if maybe she was right. Maybe I really wasn't worthy of love or celebration. That self-doubt burrowed into me like a parasite, one that took years to shake. Still, beneath the pain, a spark of defiance burned. I told myself that if my parents couldn't see my worth, I would prove it without them. I would earn scholarships, I would create my own path, and I would never, ever treat Lucy the way I had been treated. Those teenage years were some of the loneliest of my life, but they also forged me into someone strong enough to walk away when the time came. I didn't know it yet, but the skills I built, independence, resilience, and the ability to survive on my own, would one day save me when my parents tried to strip me of everything again, this time in front of my daughter. When I graduated from high school, I knew that my only ticket out of the suffocating favoritism in my parents' house was education. I wasn't just dreaming of college, I was fighting for it like my life depended on it. Every late-night study session, every dollar I saved from part-time jobs, every essay I wrote, it was all aimed at buying my own freedom. And when the letter finally came, offering me a scholarship to a state university, I cried with relief. It wasn't everything. I still had to cover books, meals, and housing, but it was a start. It was mine, earned without a shred of help from Frederick or Doris. When I showed my parents the scholarship letter, hoping for even a flicker of pride, Frederick merely grunted. Doris skimmed the page, then set it aside like junk mail. "Well, don't expect us to pay for the rest," she said flatly. "We've already got enough expenses with Hunter." At that moment, Hunter was sitting in the living room with brand new gaming equipment that had cost more than my entire semester's worth of books. The contrast was painful. They wouldn't give me a dime toward tuition or housing, but they poured money into Hunter's hobbies, his sports teams, his car when he turned 16. "Hunter deserves it," Doris would say. "He's going places." The unspoken words hung in the air. I wasn't. So I worked. I picked up shifts in the campus cafeteria, cleaned apartments on weekends, and babysat whenever I could. There were nights I ate instant noodles for dinner while Hunter posted photos of steak dinners my parents had taken him out for. But each time I deposited a paycheck into my tiny checking account, I felt a quiet surge of pride. This was my life, my future, and I was building it without them. College was hard, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I wasn't just the daughter who didn't matter. Professors saw me as a student with potential. Friends saw me as someone worth inviting out, worth listening to. Away from the constant comparisons, I began to understand that maybe I wasn't broken after all. Maybe I had just been starved of recognition at home. I majored in education, drawn to the idea of helping others find the encouragement I had always longed for. Every time I aced an exam or completed a project, I tucked away the victory in my heart like a secret jewel. I didn't need Frederick's approval or Doris's applause. Their silence became the proof that I was succeeding on my own terms. Still, the favoritism followed me like a shadow. On visits home, Doris would gush about Hunter's small accomplishments, how he'd gotten a good grade in one class or made the winning point in a game. Meanwhile, if I mentioned my scholarship renewal or my GPA, she would dismiss it with a shrug. "That's what's expected, Lena. Don't act like it's a big deal." But inside, it was a big deal. It was survival, it was defiance, it was proof that I was more than their neglect. Each step I took toward independence carved out a new part of me, one that believed in my own strength even when my parents never would. Those college years were exhausting, but they laid the foundation for everything that came after. Meeting Marcus, starting my own family, and standing firm in moments when I wanted to collapse. My parents might have denied me love, money, and recognition, but they couldn't deny me my determination. And that, more than anything, became the weapon I carried into adulthood. I met Marcus during my second year of college, at a time when I was juggling 2 part-time jobs and a full course load. I wasn't looking for love. I barely had the time to eat a proper meal, but somehow, fate had other plans. It was a chilly autumn morning, and I was running late to class, clutching a pile of books in my arms. I tripped on the uneven pavement outside the library, and, before I hit the ground, someone caught me. That someone was Marcus. He studied me with a gentle grip, his warm smile disarming the usual defenses I carried around like armor. "You okay?" he asked, his voice steady, calm. I laughed nervously, embarrassed, but there was something in the way he looked at me that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced before. Over the weeks that followed, I noticed him more, sitting a few rows behind me in lectures, studying at the same cafe where I worked evening shifts, offering to walk me home when our study sessions stretched late into the night. He wasn't loud or flashy like some guys. He was steady, patient, and genuinely kind. For someone like me, used to being overlooked, dismissed, or criticized, his attention felt almost too good to be true. Marcus never cared that I worked extra jobs or wore thrift store clothes. He admired my independence. When I confessed that I often skipped social outings because I couldn't afford them, he didn't pity me. He simply invited me for long walks through Brookfield Hollow's quiet streets or free concerts at the park. Slowly, I let my guard down, and love crept in like sunlight through a crack in a dark room. By the time graduation was approaching, we were inseparable. Marcus made me believe in a future that wasn't dictated by my parents' cold approval or their obsession with Hunter. He made me believe I was worth more than second place. So when he proposed the idea of marriage, it felt like the most natural step forward. But when I told my parents, the reaction was as harsh as I should have expected. Doris's face tightened with disapproval, and Frederick slammed his hand against the table. "Absolutely not," he barked. "You will not disgrace this family with a love marriage. Marriages are about alliances, about arrangements, not foolish emotions." I tried to argue. I told them Marcus was a good man, hardworking, respectful. But they wouldn't hear a word. Doris sneered. "He isn't from our circle. What will people say? You're ruining your life." And then, like always, she brought Hunter into the conversation. "Look at your brother. He'll marry someone suitable, someone who adds value to this family. Why can't you be more like him?" The insults cut deep. They called me reckless, selfish, ungrateful. For daring to choose love, I was accused of betraying the very family that had already betrayed me countless times. But for once, I didn't fold under their words. Marcus stood by me, his quiet strength giving me courage. I chose him. I chose a life where love mattered more than status or appearances. My parents never truly forgave me for it, and when the wedding day came, they showed up only briefly, making it clear that they considered me a disappointment. They gave me nothing, not even their blessing, and sent me away with empty hands. But when Marcus slipped the ring onto my finger, his eyes steady and full of promise, I realized I had gained something far more valuable than anything my parents could have given me. I had chosen a man who saw me, not as a shadow of Hunter, not as a burden, but as his partner, his equal, his love. My wedding day should have been one of the happiest moments of my life, but instead, it became one of the most painful reminders of how little I mattered to my parents. Marcus and I had kept things simple, nothing extravagant, just a modest ceremony in Brookfield Hollow with close friends and a few relatives who genuinely cared about us. The air smelled of roses from the small bouquet in my hands, and my heart should have been full. But all I could feel was the heavy silence from Frederick and Doris, who arrived late and sat stiffly in the corner as if attending an obligation rather than their own daughter's wedding. They wore expressions that spoke louder than words: disappointment, disdain, maybe even embarrassment. While Marcus's family smiled warmly and showered us with affection, my parents barely looked at me. Doris leaned in to whisper something to Frederick as I walked down the aisle, and though I couldn't hear the words, the sneer on her face told me enough. I was an inconvenience. a mistake being shuffled off so they could focus on their golden child. When it came time for speeches, Marcus's mother, Helen Turner, stood up. Her voice shook with emotion as she welcomed me into the family. "Lena," she said, her eyes glistening, "you are not just Marcus's bride. You are our daughter now. We are honored to have you." Her words wrapped around me like a blanket of love I had longed for my entire life. I blinked back tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming contrast between her acceptance and my parents' cold indifference. After Helen, the officiant glanced toward my parents, asking if they would like to say a few words. Doris shook her head sharply, her lips pressed into a thin line. Frederick cleared his throat and muttered something about hoping we knew what we were doing, then sat back down. No blessing, no pride, no acknowledgement that their daughter was beginning a new chapter. The silence was deafening. As the reception began, Marcus's relatives gave us thoughtful gifts, dishes, handmade quilts, even a small check to help us start our life together. My parents, however, handed me nothing. No card, no token, not even the gesture of a smile. They had chosen to make a statement, and it was clear. I was being sent away empty-handed. The humiliation burned deep. Relatives whispered, some trying to cover their shock. A few aunts came to hug me quietly, muttering that I deserved better. But the damage was done. My parents had taken what should have been a day of joy and turned it into another lesson in where I stood in their hierarchy, beneath Hunter, beneath their expectations, beneath their pride. Still, as painful as it was, I made a choice that night. I refused to let their cruelty define me. I looked at Marcus, who held my hand with steady strength, and I realized that this marriage wasn't about what I lost. It was about what I gained. I had a partner who loved me, who believed in me, who would never treat me as second best. As Marcus and I drove away from the reception hall that evening, the headlights cutting through the dark Brookfield Hollow roads, I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and let out a long breath. "They gave me nothing," I whispered. Marcus squeezed my hand and answered softly, "Then we'll build everything together." Humiliated, yes. Wounded, absolutely. But beneath the pain was a flicker of determination. If my parents had sent me away empty-handed, then I would create my own life, my own happiness, and my own legacy, with Marcus by my side. A year after our wedding, Marcus and I welcomed our daughter, Lucy, into the world. I was 22, still young by many standards, but the moment I held her in my arms, I felt a strength and purpose I had never known before. Her tiny fingers curled around mine, and for the first time in my life, I understood unconditional love, not the fractured, conditional kind my parents had shown me, but the kind that consumed every part of you and made you vow to protect it no matter what. Marcus was overjoyed, pacing the hospital room with tears in his eyes as he kept saying, "She's perfect, Lena. Absolutely perfect." Helen, my mother-in-law, rushed in with flowers and a knitted blanket she had made herself. She cradled Lucy with the tenderness of someone who had been waiting her whole life to hold a granddaughter. That day should have been the happiest of all our lives. And in many ways it was. But the absence of my parents was like a shadow creeping into the room. Frederick and Doris never came. Not to the hospital, not to our home when we brought Lucy back, not even weeks later. There was no phone call, no gift, not even a token acknowledgement that their first grandchild had been born. I told myself it didn't matter, that Lucy had all the love she needed from me, Marcus, and Helen, but in my heart, it hurt deeply. I had secretly hoped that maybe, just maybe, the arrival of a granddaughter would soften them, that they might finally see me as someone worth celebrating. But as the weeks passed, I heard through relatives that Hunter was being spoiled more than ever. He had just started college, and my parents had bought him a brand new car. Doris bragged about it to anyone who would listen. "Hunter deserves the best," she would say proudly. Meanwhile, my baby girl, their granddaughter, wasn't even worth a phone call. The contrast was crushing. At family gatherings, Hunter was paraded around like a prize, while Lucy and I were treated like afterthoughts. Once, when Lucy was a toddler and we stopped by during the holidays, Doris barely looked at her. She handed Hunter an envelope stuffed with cash and then glanced at me with cold disapproval. "You've made your choices, Lena," she said, as though choosing love and family was something shameful. But if my parents couldn't celebrate Lucy, Marcus and I made sure she grew up surrounded by warmth elsewhere. Helen became a second mother to me, filling the void Doris had left. She was there for every milestone: Lucy's first steps, her first day of preschool, every birthday cake and celebration. Marcus worked hard to provide, and though money was often tight, our home was filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and a sense of belonging I had never known as a child. Lucy thrived in that love. She grew into a bright-eyed little girl who laughed loudly, asked endless questions, and hugged me fiercely every morning before school. Every time I looked at her, I was reminded of my vow: she would never feel the sting of neglect that I had carried all my life. And yet, as happy as I was with my small family, the bitterness toward my parents continued to grow. Their favoritism toward Hunter had been obvious when we were kids, but now, as adults, it had calcified into something crueler. They celebrated his every achievement, his every step forward, while treating my life as though it didn't exist. I told myself I didn't need their approval anymore, but deep down, I knew the pain of being their forgotten child would follow me into every stage of my life. I just didn't realize then how far that favoritism would go, or how violently it would one day collide with the happiness I had built. The next 12 years of my life were a mixture of struggle and love, hardship and quiet victories. Raising Lucy, working to help support our household, and building a life with Marcus became my entire world. Those years weren't easy, far from it, but they were full of meaning, and they reminded me that happiness didn't have to come from wealth or my parents' approval. It could come from the bonds we built inside our own home. Marcus worked tirelessly, taking on long shifts so we could keep up with bills, groceries, and Lucy's schooling. I pitched in whenever I could, balancing part-time jobs with the responsibilities of being a mother. Some nights I came home exhausted, my hands aching from long hours, but the moment Lucy wrapped her arms around my waist and said, "I love you, Mom," all the fatigue melted away. Our home was modest, nothing like the big house Hunter grew up in, but it was filled with laughter and warmth. We ate dinner together at a small wooden table, talked about our days, and celebrated even the smallest milestones. Lucy's first spelling bee, her soccer games, her art projects, they were all treated like grand occasions. Marcus and I made sure she knew that she mattered, that her achievements deserved recognition. I swore she would never feel the emptiness I had felt growing up. Helen Turner, my mother-in-law, became the anchor I had always longed for in a parent. She stepped into my life not just as Marcus's mother, but as the mother I never had. Helen was there when I needed advice, when Lucy needed babysitting, or when the weight of my past crept back in and threatened to overwhelm me. "Lena," she would tell me softly, "family is not just who you're born to, it's who shows up for you, who loves you without conditions." And she lived those words. She never once made me feel like an outsider. To her, I was a daughter, and Lucy was her pride and joy. She came to every school play, every holiday, every birthday party. She took photos, baked cakes, and clapped the loudest in the audience. Helen filled the empty spaces left by Frederick and Doris with unwavering support and kindness, and for that, I will always be grateful. Still, the shadow of my parents' favoritism was never far away. Over those 12 years, I heard countless stories of how Hunter was being pampered, new cars, vacations, financial support for every whim. My parents funded his every step into adulthood while ignoring my existence. When relatives brought up Lucy's achievements, Doris would dismiss them with a wave of her hand. "That's what kids are supposed to do," she'd say, as if nothing my daughter accomplished was worth pride. The hurt never truly disappeared, but I learned to live with it. My energy was better spent on nurturing the family I had, the one that loved me back. And Lucy gave me a sense of purpose I had never known before. Watching her grow into a kind, curious, and determined girl was proof that cycles of neglect could be broken. I could give her the childhood I had been denied. Those 12 years tested us in every way, financially, emotionally, physically. But they also proved something powerful. Love, respect, and support matter far more than wealth or approval from people who refuse to give it. By the time Lucy turned 12, our bond as a family was unshakable. I didn't know then that this bond would soon be tested in the cruelest way imaginable, at a wedding that would rip open every old wound and leave new ones behind. It was a quiet evening at home when the envelope arrived, white, embossed, with golden lettering spelling out Hunter's name. I held it in my hands for a long time before I even opened it, my stomach twisting with an unease I couldn't ignore. When I finally slid the card out, the words stared back at me. You are cordially invited to celebrate the marriage of Hunter Porter. My younger brother, the golden child, was getting married at 27. I sat at the kitchen table, the invitation trembling between my fingers. Memories of my own wedding flooded back. How Frederick and Doris had barely shown up, how they had given me nothing, how they had made sure everyone knew I was sent away empty-handed. My throat tightened. Did I really want to step into another one of their grand displays, where I would once again be reminded of how little I meant to them? Marcus noticed the way my shoulders slumped. He set his hand gently over mine. What is it? He asked softly. I slid the card toward him. He read it quickly and sighed, already knowing the storm brewing inside me. Hunter's wedding, he said. Helen, who was sitting nearby knitting, looked up with kind eyes. Are you going to go? She asked. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to crumple the invitation and toss it in the trash. I had built a life far from their cruelty, and I didn't want to walk back into their world of favoritism and humiliation. But then my eyes drifted toward Lucy, who was sprawled on the living room floor working on a school project. She was 12 now, old enough to understand family dynamics, old enough to see the way my parents treated us. She should see what family gatherings are like, I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. She should see it with her own eyes. Maybe she'll understand why I am the way I am. Marcus squeezed my hand. Or maybe she'll see how strong you are. You don't have to hide from them anymore, Lena. You can walk into that place with your head held high, knowing you've built something they could never take away. Helen nodded in agreement. He's right. You go there not to prove anything to Frederick or Doris, but to show Lucy that dignity isn't something anyone can give or take. It's yours. And Lena, no matter what happens, you'll have us standing beside you. Her words washed over me like a balm, but the unease didn't disappear. I could already imagine the grand spectacle my parents would make of Hunter's wedding. There would be no holding back. Expensive decorations, extravagant food, announcements of gifts and property, all meant to show how much they valued their son. And I knew, deep down, they wouldn't resist the chance to remind me where I stood. Still, a decision formed in my heart. I would go, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. For Lucy's sake, for my own peace, I had to face them. Avoiding them forever wasn't strength, it was surrender. And I had promised myself long ago never to surrender to their cruelty again. That night, I tucked Lucy into bed. As she drifted off, she looked up at me and said, Mom, are we going to Uncle Hunter's wedding? Her innocent eyes searched mine, and I kissed her forehead. Yes, sweetheart, I said. We're going. Together. I lay awake for hours after that, staring at the ceiling. I had no idea how ugly that wedding day would become, how it would spiral into chaos, and how my daughter, the light of my life, would be the one to suffer the blow of my parents' final act of cruelty. The day of Hunter's wedding arrived with the kind of fanfare I had always imagined my parents saving for him. As Marcus drove us through the heart of Brookfield Hollow, the streets leading to the venue were lined with banners, balloons, and floral arches. It felt less like a family celebration and more like a town-wide event. My stomach tightened as we pulled up in front of the sprawling banquet hall, its doors framed with towering arrangements of roses and lilies, each bouquet large enough to cost more than a month's rent. Lucy leaned forward in her seat, her eyes wide. Wow, Mom, look at all this. She sounded amazed, but I caught the hint of something else in her voice, a quiet awareness that her grandparents had never done anything remotely like this for us. Marcus parked the car and reached for my hand before we got out. Remember what we talked about, he whispered. Head high. We're here together. His grip steadied me, and I nodded, though my chest still ached. The moment we stepped onto the sidewalk, a flashbulb went off. Photographers darted around, capturing every detail of the arriving guests. The carpet leading to the entrance wasn't red but gold, glittering under the sunlight. I watched as Hunter's friends strutted inside, laughing, their suits tailored and their confidence spilling into the air like champagne. My brother had always been showered with praise, but this time, my parents had turned his wedding into a declaration. Hunter is everything. Hunter deserves it all. I felt like an intruder, walking through a world built to remind me of my place. The chandeliers sparkled above the open doors, reflecting off the polished marble floors. Inside, tables were set with crystal glasses, fine china, and centerpieces that looked like something from a magazine. Every detail screamed money, money that had never been spent on me, not even a fraction of it. As we walked in, Doris spotted us. She wore a gown that glistened with sequins, her hair swept into an elaborate style that must have taken hours to perfect. Beside her stood Frederick in a custom-tailored suit, puffing out his chest like he was the king of the evening. Both smiled warmly at other guests, their hands extended in greeting. But when their eyes landed on me, the warmth disappeared, replaced by the same cold disapproval I had known my whole life. Lena, Doris said curtly, her eyes scanning me from head to toe as though I had ruined the photos just by existing. She didn't even look at Marcus or Lucy. You came. Yes, Mother, I did. I replied quietly, refusing to bow my head. Frederick gave a slight grunt and turned away, already focused on shaking someone else's hand. Their dismissal stung, but it wasn't surprising. What struck me harder was the sight of Hunter across the room, standing proudly with his bride-to-be. My brother was glowing, dressed in a tuxedo my parents had no doubt paid for, surrounded by a circle of friends and relatives who treated him like royalty. When his eyes met mine, he smirked, as if he already knew I didn't belong. Lucy tugged at my hand, her voice barely above a whisper. Mom, why don't they look happy to see us? My heart broke at the question, but I forced a smile for her sake. Because they're too busy showing off, I said softly. We took our seats in the back, away from the center of attention. I let my eyes wander across the hall. The massive ice sculpture carved with Hunter's initials, the extravagant stage decorated with cascading flowers, the live band setting up to play. It was the kind of wedding every daughter dreams of, but for me, it was a painful reminder. My parents had poured everything into Hunter's big day, while I had been sent away with nothing. I sat in silence, the laughter and music swirling around me, and wondered how long it would be before the thin layer of civility shattered and the truth of our family would spill into the open. The reception was already in full swing when it happened. Guests filled the hall with laughter and chatter, clinking their glasses while waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with trays of champagne. Music drifted through the air, soft and elegant, setting the tone for what my parents clearly wanted to be remembered as the grandest night of their lives. I sat beside Marcus and Lucy, trying to stay small in the sea of extravagance. The stage shimmered with cascading flowers, and Hunter stood proudly at the center, his bride radiant at his side. My parents hovered close, glowing in the reflected light of their son's success, basking in the admiration of neighbors, colleagues, and extended family. Then Doris tapped the microphone, and the room fell silent. The sound was sharp, commanding, as if the very air bent to her will. I felt my chest tighten the way it always did when she prepared to speak in public, because I knew, without a doubt, that she would find a way to remind the world of how much Hunter mattered. Ladies and gentlemen, Doris began, her voice smooth and confident. Thank you all for being here to celebrate this blessed union. Tonight is not just about two hearts joining together. It is about family, legacy, and the future we are building through our beloved son, Hunter. Applause rippled through the hall, and I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. Beside me, Lucy watched intently, her young brow furrowed as though even she sensed the weight of the moment. Doris continued, her words swelling with pride. Frederick and I could not be prouder of our son. From the day he was born, we knew he was destined for great things. And tonight, we want to show him and all of you just how much he means to us. I already knew what was coming. My heart pounded with dread, but still I wasn't prepared for the cruelty of the spectacle. First, Doris said with a grand flourish, "We are gifting Hunter a financial gift of $200,000 to help him and his beautiful bride begin their life together." The crowd erupted in applause. Gasps of admiration filled the air, and people turned to Hunter, who beamed with pride. And second, Doris added, pausing for dramatic effect, "We are officially transferring ownership of a brand new home in Brookfield Hollow to Hunter's name. It is our joy to know that our son will have a place of his own, a foundation for his future, just as he deserves." The applause thundered louder this time, echoing through the walls. Guests rose to their feet in ovation, cheering, clapping, even whistling. Hunter puffed his chest and bowed slightly, his smug grin stretching wider as he soaked in the admiration. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might be sick. The memory of my own wedding flashed before me, the way I had been sent away empty-handed, with no gift, no acknowledgement, nothing but humiliation. The contrast was unbearable. Lucy tugged at my sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "Grandma and Grandpa didn't give you a house, did they?" Her innocent question pierced me deeper than any insult. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "They didn't." Marcus reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it in silent support, but the shame was already burning in my chest. Around me, the applause kept rolling, every clap like a slap in the face. My parents had once again chosen to make a public display of their favoritism, and they wanted me to watch, powerless, as the world celebrated their decision. I sat frozen, feeling the eyes of strangers and relatives all around me, and wondered how much longer I could stay silent before the years of swallowed pain finally spilled out into the open. The applause was still echoing through the hall when I felt something snap inside me. For years, I had swallowed their insults, endured their indifference, and carried the weight of being invisible in my own family. But watching Doris beam with pride as she announced a house and a fortune for Hunter, while I sat there with Marcus and Lucy, knowing I had been cast aside with nothing, was more than I could bear. My hands trembled as I pushed back my chair. Marcus gave me a questioning look, his eyes wide, but I shook my head. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Slowly, I stood up, the legs of my chair scraping against the polished floor. Conversations faltered around me as guests turned to look. "Excuse me," I said, my voice clear though my heart pounded so loud I could barely hear myself. The microphone was still in Doris's hand, but the silence that fell across the room gave my words more weight than any amplifier could. My mother's smile faltered. "Lena, sit down," she hissed from the stage, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. But I didn't sit. Instead, I took a step forward, my chin lifted high, and spoke louder. "I have a question." My voice shook at first, but then steadied as years of buried pain rose to the surface. Why was my marriage worth less than Hunter's? Why was I sent away empty-handed, as though my happiness didn't matter? Don't daughters deserve equal love from their parents? A collective gasp swept through the hall. Guests glanced at one another, whispering behind hands, their applause now replaced with stunned silence. Frederick's face turned red, his jaw clenching tight. Doris's eyes blazed with fury. "This is not the time or the place," she snapped into the microphone. "No," I said firmly, my voice ringing through the hall. "This is exactly the time and place. You stood here in front of everyone and made a show of how much you love Hunter. You gave him everything, a house, money, your blessing. But when I married Marcus, you gave me nothing. Not even your support. You made sure I walked away humiliated. And now, in front of my daughter, you're doing it again." Lucy's small hand gripped mine tightly. I glanced down at her innocent face, her eyes wide, searching. She was old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to see the truth I had tried to shield her from. And I knew, in that moment, I had to say the words I had held back for too long. "I am your daughter too, I said, my voice breaking but strong. And Lucy is your granddaughter. Why is she not worth celebrating? Why do you treat us as if we don't belong? The silence stretched painfully long. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, they would finally see me, hear me, recognize the damage they had done. But then Hunter's laugh sliced through the stillness. You're jealous, he sneered, stepping forward. You couldn't let me have my moment, could you? You had to ruin my wedding just because you can't stand that Mom and Dad love me more. The words stung like fire. Doris nodded in agreement, her face twisted with contempt. You've always been ungrateful, Lena. Always looking for pity. Tonight is about your brother, not your bitterness. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some sympathetic, others judgmental. I felt exposed, raw, but I refused to back down. I stood tall, my voice steady despite the tears burning in my eyes. This isn't about jealousy. It's about fairness. It's about love. And I will not let Lucy grow up thinking this is normal, that it's okay to be treated like she doesn't matter. The tension in the hall was electric, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I didn't know it yet, but the storm was already gathering, and before the night was over, it would explode in violence no one could have imagined. For a heartbeat, the hall was frozen in silence. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, their gazes sharp and unblinking, waiting to see what would happen next. My words still hung in the air, raw, undeniable, but my parents weren't about to let them stand. Doris was the first to strike. She lifted the microphone again, her face twisted with anger, her sequined gown glittering under the lights like a cruel disguise. Jealous, she spat, her voice echoing through the speakers. That's all you've ever been, Lena. Jealous and ungrateful. We gave you a roof over your head, food on your plate, and this is how you repay us? By trying to ruin your brother's wedding. Her words sliced through me, but I didn't flinch. I had heard them all my life, whispered behind closed doors or hurled at me in moments of anger. Now she was saying them in front of everyone, turning my pain into a spectacle. Before I could respond, Hunter stepped forward, his face flushed, his jaw clenched in fury. You just couldn't help yourself, could you? He snarled, pointing a finger at me like an accusation. This was supposed to be my night, and you had to make it about you. You're pathetic, Lena. Always playing the victim, always pretending the world owes you something. Gasps and whispers swept through the crowd. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others leaned toward one another, murmuring. I caught bits of it. Poor girl, someone said. Always the black sheep. But others weren't as kind. She shouldn't have spoken up, another guest whispered harshly. It's Hunter's day, not hers. My throat tightened, but I stood my ground. Lucy's small hand clung to mine, her trembling body pressed close against me. I wanted to protect her from the ugliness, but I also knew she needed to see that I would not be silenced. Across the hall, I spotted Marcus talking with one of his cousins, oblivious to what was happening. He hadn't heard the explosion of words, hadn't seen Doris's venom or Hunter's rage. I tried to catch his eye, but the crowd was too thick. It felt like I was standing on a stage, abandoned, with the weight of an entire family's judgment crashing down on me. Doris's voice grew sharper, her anger feeding off the murmurs around us. You've always resented your brother. Always envied what he has. Well, Hunter earned this. He is worthy of our pride. You, Lena, you chose to disgrace us with that marriage of yours, and you expect us to shower you with gifts? You're lucky we even showed up to that pitiful excuse of a wedding. Her words burned, but it was Hunter's next sentence that cut deepest. You're nothing but a burden, Lena. Mom and Dad were right to give me everything and you nothing. Look at you, still whining, still bitter. No wonder they don't celebrate you. The hall buzzed with whispers. Some guests avoided my gaze, uncomfortable with the cruelty unfolding. Others stared openly, eager for drama. I felt the walls closing in, the humiliation pressing down like a weight I couldn't shake off. Lucy's eyes filled with tears. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. Why are they saying that? My heart cracked at the fear in her voice, but before I could comfort her, Doris leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. "Because it's the truth," she said coldly. The world tilted then, the moment teetering on the edge of collapse. I could feel the storm rising in Frederick's silence, in Hunter's clenched fists, in the cruel smirk pulling at Doris's lips. And though I didn't know it yet, what came next would shatter the evening into chaos, leaving scars none of us would ever forget. The tension in the room thickened until it felt like I could hardly breathe. I stood there, clutching Lucy's hand, refusing to lower my eyes even as Doris and Hunter hurled their accusations. My chest burned with humiliation, but I kept my spine straight. I would not let them see me crumble. Then it happened. Hunter's rage boiled over. He stepped toward me so suddenly that Lucy flinched and pressed closer to my side. His face was twisted, his voice venomous as he growled, "You're pathetic, Lena. Always have been." Before I could react, he shoved me hard. The force knocked me back several steps, my heels sliding against the polished floor. I barely managed to keep hold of Lucy's hand as I stumbled. Gasps echoed through the hall, chairs scraping as guests shot to their feet. I steadied myself, my heart pounding, but the shock wasn't over. Doris was already moving, her eyes blazing with the same fury I had seen countless times as a child. Only this time, it wasn't behind closed doors. It was in front of everyone. "You ungrateful girl," she screamed. And then her hand cracked across my face with a sound so sharp it silenced the entire hall. The sting burned instantly, spreading across my cheek. My vision blurred for a moment, and I staggered backward, the room tilting. I hit the floor hard, my hand scraping against the cold marble, the pain radiating up my arm. Lucy cried out, kneeling beside me, tears spilling down her cheeks. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some guests gasped and covered their mouths, others whispered frantically, unable to believe what they had just seen. A few even rushed forward, but most stood frozen, horrified spectators at the public unraveling of a family. From across the hall, I finally heard Marcus's voice. "Lena." He was shoving through the sea of stunned faces, his eyes wide with alarm. But he was too far, and in those few seconds, I was alone, staring up at the mother who had just struck me and the brother who had shoved me aside like garbage. Doris towered over me, her chest heaving, her hand still raised as if she wanted to strike again. "You ruin everything," she spat, her voice shaking with hatred. "Even tonight, you can't keep your mouth shut. You're nothing compared to your brother." Hunter stood beside her, arms crossed, his smirk returning now that I was on the ground. "See? This is who she is. Always making a scene. Always dragging us down." Every word was another wound. The sting on my cheek was nothing compared to the crushing weight in my chest. For years, I had endured their neglect, their favoritism, their disdain. But this was violence in its purest form, carried out in front of my daughter and a hall full of witnesses. Lucy's sobs grew louder as she clung to me. "Mom, please let's go," she begged, her little hands trembling as she tried to help me up. I pulled her close, kissing her damp hair, trying to steady myself. Around us, whispers rippled. Did she really just hit her? The poor woman, in front of her child. I tried to rise, my legs unsteady, but the room was spinning. My cheek throbbed where Doris's slap had landed. I could feel the humiliation pressing down on me, hotter than the pain itself. And yet, as awful as that moment was, none of us realized that the violence was not over. In the corner of the room, Frederick's face was darkening, his body trembling with rage. He hadn't spoken yet, but his silence was more terrifying than any word. The storm inside him was about to break, and when it did, the consequences would scar us all forever. The room was already spiraling into chaos after Doris's slap, but it was Frederick's silence that froze me with dread. My father stood rigid near the stage, his fists clenched, his face twisted in a fury so dark it was almost unrecognizable. He had always been harsh, quick to scold, but there was something different in him now, something violent simmering beneath the surface. "Enough," he growled suddenly, his voice deep and thunderous. Guests turned to look at him, the air thick with unease. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe he was going to call Doris and Hunter back to tell them to stop. But then I saw the wild rage in his eyes, and I knew I was wrong. In one swift motion, Frederick stormed toward the cameraman stationed near the dance floor. Without warning, he yanked the tripod straight out of the man's hands. The photographer stumbled back, startled, but Frederick was already swinging it like a weapon. Before I could even process what was happening, his fury found its target. He brought the tripod down hard, on Lucy. The sickening crack echoed through the hall, followed by a piercing scream that ripped through the air. My 12-year-old daughter crumpled to the ground, her small body folding as she clutched her head. Blood streamed instantly down the side of her face, staining her dress, dripping onto the polished marble floor. "Lucy!" I screamed, my own voice breaking into a sob as I scrambled toward her. My knees hit the floor painfully as I gathered her in my arms. Her cries were shrill, agonized, and desperate. Her little hands trembled as they tried to cover the wound, but the blood kept coming, soaking my fingers as I pressed them to her head in a frantic attempt to stop it. The hall erupted. Guests screamed, some rushing forward, others backing away in shock. The bride's family shouted in horror. Chairs toppled over as people scattered, trying to get out of the way. The once grand reception now looked like the scene of a nightmare. Marcus's voice cut through the noise, raw and panicked. "Lucy!" He shoved his way past relatives, his face white with terror, and dropped to the floor beside us. His hands shook as he tried to help me press against the wound. "Call 911, he yelled, his voice cracking. Helen Turner was there too, her face stricken, clutching my shoulder as she whispered, stay with her, she's going to be okay." But my father wasn't finished. He still gripped the tripod, his chest heaving, his eyes wild as he shouted, "Get out of here. You don't belong in this family. Take your daughter and leave. Everything here is Hunter's. Everything." His voice was so filled with hatred that for a second, the entire hall seemed paralyzed. Then came the wave of shouts. "He hit a child. Someone stop him. Police, call the police." The cameraman who had lost his equipment was already on the phone, his voice shaking as he reported the assault. Several guests grabbed Frederick, struggling to hold him back as he tried to wrench free. Doris screamed, insisting he had done nothing wrong, while Hunter shouted at the guests to let their father go. But the damage was already done. My daughter lay bleeding in my arms, her sobs weakening, her body trembling as I rocked her desperately. I pressed my cheek against her hair, my tears mixing with the blood on her dress. "Stay with me, Lucy," I begged. "Please, baby, stay with me." In that moment, the truth was undeniable to everyone in that hall. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. It wasn't neglect or words that cut deep. It was violence, brutal and unforgivable, carried out against an innocent child in front of 100 witnesses. And there would be no going back. Time seemed to blur after the blow landed. Lucy's screams echoed in my ears like a sound I would never forget, raw and piercing, filled with terror and pain. I held her tightly against me, my hands soaked in her blood, my body shaking so hard I could barely keep myself upright. Around us, the once celebratory hall dissolved into chaos. Guests were shouting, some rushing toward us, others stumbling back in horror. The music had stopped, and all that remained was the sound of panic. Marcus shoved through the crowd like a man possessed. His face was pale, his eyes wild, but his movements were steady as he dropped to his knees beside us. "Lena, let me see her." His hands pressed over mine, helping apply pressure to Lucy's wound, his fingers slick with her blood. "Stay with me, sweetheart," he whispered to her, his voice breaking. "Daddy's here. You're going to be okay." Lucy whimpered weakly, her body trembling in my lap. "It hurts," she cried, her voice barely more than a whisper. My heart shattered all over again. "Call 911. Marcus roared, his voice carrying across the hall. Several guests pulled out their phones, but Marcus grabbed his himself, dialing with one hand while never letting go of Lucy with the other. His voice was urgent and sharp as he gave the operator our location. "There's been an assault. My 12-year-old daughter's been hit in the head. She's bleeding badly. We need paramedics and police immediately. Helen was suddenly at my side, crouching down and wrapping her arms around me as I shook uncontrollably. Lena, you've got to breathe, she whispered, her hand gripping my shoulder firmly. Marcus is calling.
Help is on the way.
Hold Lucy close. You're not alone. Her voice, calm but trembling with emotion, anchored me in the storm. Meanwhile, Frederick was still thrashing, shouting over the screams. She brought this on herself. She doesn't belong here. Neither of them do. He tried to break free from the men holding him back, his face crimson with rage. Doris clawed at the arms restraining her husband, shrieking, "Leave him alone. He's done nothing wrong. This is all Lena's fault." And Hunter, instead of showing remorse, stormed toward us, yelling at the guests who had stepped between him and my family. "Get out of the way. She's always trying to ruin everything." The scene was unbearable. 3 people so blinded by hatred and pride that even the sight of a child bleeding on the floor couldn't stop them. And then the sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, until flashing red and blue lights painted the walls through the banquet hall's glass doors. Relief and fear crashed over me in equal measure. Within moments, police officers and paramedics stormed in. The officers immediately pushed through the crowd, separating the chaos. "Step back." Everyone stepped back, one shouted, while another moved quickly toward Frederick, forcing him to the ground. He fought, shouting curses, but handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Doris shrieked as she was pulled aside, her protests ignored. Hunter was restrained too, his angry voice muffled under the shouts of officers demanding order. The paramedics dropped to their knees beside Lucy. "We've got her," one said firmly, gently moving Marcus aside. They worked quickly, bandaging, stabilizing, checking her pulse and pupils. Lucy whimpered when they lifted her onto a stretcher, and I clung to her hand until they told me I needed to let go. "Ma'am, you can ride with her," one paramedic assured me. I kissed Lucy's hand through my tears, whispering, "I'm right here, baby. I'm not leaving you." As the officers led Frederick, Doris, and Hunter out in handcuffs, the hall was filled with stunned silence, broken only by the sobs of shaken guests. The night that had been meant to showcase Hunter's glory had ended in sirens, blood, and disgrace. And for the first time, in front of everyone, the truth was undeniable. The family I was born into had become my daughter's worst nightmare. The ride in the ambulance was a blur of flashing lights, frantic voices, and the steady beep of medical monitors. I sat squeezed beside Lucy on the stretcher, holding her hand as tightly as I could, whispering prayers under my breath. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, and the blood-soaked bandages wrapped around her head made my stomach twist with fear. Every bump in the road seemed to jar her fragile body, and each time she whimpered, it felt like my heart was breaking all over again. "Stay with me, baby," I whispered, brushing her damp hair back from her face. "Mommy's right here. You're so brave. We're going to get through this." Marcus followed in a separate car with Helen, refusing to leave our side even for a moment. By the time we reached Brookfield Hollow General Hospital, a team of doctors and nurses were already waiting. The doors flew open, and Lucy was rushed inside. I stumbled after them, my legs unsteady, my face still burning from Doris's slap and my arms aching from the fall. The emergency room was bright, sterile, overwhelming. They whisked Lucy into a trauma bay, where doctors swarmed around her, checking her vitals, shining lights into her eyes, carefully cleaning and stitching the wound on her head. I stood frozen, clutching the edge of a chair, helpless as strangers worked to save my little girl. "Ma'am, you need to be examined too," a nurse told me gently, guiding me into another bay. I hadn't even realized how badly I was shaking until I sat down. My cheek was swollen, already bruising from Doris's slap. My arms were scraped from the fall, and my ribs ached from Hunter's shove. The nurse documented every injury, her pen scratching across the chart. Photographs were taken not just of Lucy, but of me as well. Every bruise, every mark was carefully recorded. These reports will be filed immediately, the nurse explained. They'll be important for the investigation. Investigation. The word rang in my ears. This wasn't just a family fight anymore, it was a criminal case. Not long after, a woman with kind eyes and a clipboard approached me. "I'm with Child Protective Services," she said softly. "I need to speak with you about what happened tonight." I nodded numbly, glancing at Lucy through the curtain where she lay on a bed, drifting in and out of sleep, Marcus sitting beside her. I told the CPS worker everything. The favoritism, the years of neglect, the violent explosion at the wedding, how Frederick had swung that tripod with such force that it nearly killed my daughter. She listened carefully, taking notes, her face tightening with concern. A social worker joined her, asking questions about her home life, about Marcus, about whether Lucy was safe in our care. I answered firmly, "Yes. She is safe with us. She has always been safe with us. It's them she wasn't safe with, my parents, my brother. They've treated me as less my whole life, but tonight they crossed a line that can't ever be erased." The CPS worker nodded. "We believe you. The evidence is clear. The hospital reports, your injuries, Lucy's injuries, the witness statements, it's all going to support the case." I exhaled shakily, the weight of years of silence pressing down on me. For the first time, I realized the truth. The bruises on my body, the stitches on Lucy's head, the official records, they weren't just wounds. They were proof. Proof of everything I had endured. Proof that could no longer be denied, ignored, or dismissed. As I sat there, holding Lucy's hand while the machines beeped steadily beside her, I knew that this night would change everything. My parents had once sent me away empty-handed. But now, with these reports and records in hand, I finally had something powerful enough to make sure they would never hurt me, or my daughter, again. While Lucy and I were being treated at the hospital, news of the wedding's collapse was already spreading like wildfire through Brookfield Hollow. What had begun as Hunter's grand moment of glory had transformed into a nightmare no one in town would ever forget. Guests who had witnessed the violence couldn't stop talking about it. Some had filmed bits of the chaos on their phones, the shove, the slap, the horrifying moment when Frederick brought the tripod down on Lucy. Those images spread quickly among the crowd, and before the night was even over, the story had reached Hunter's fiancée's family. They were horrified. The bride's father, a stern man who had been skeptical of my parents from the beginning, stood up in the middle of the reception hall. His voice carried through the shocked silence. "This wedding is over," he announced firmly, his hand gripping his daughter's arm as he pulled her away from Hunter. "We will not tie our daughter to a family capable of this kind of violence." Gasps filled the room. Hunter's fiancée looked torn between tears and relief, her eyes wide with shame as she glanced from her father to the blood still staining the marble floor where Lucy had collapsed. "My daughter deserves better than this," her mother added, her voice trembling with fury. "We wanted to believe Hunter was a good man, but after what we've seen tonight, after what your family has done, we know the truth. We are leaving, and this engagement is finished." Hunter's face twisted in disbelief.
"What?"
"No, you can't do this," he shouted, reaching for his bride. But her father blocked him with a single, commanding gesture. "Stay away from her. If this is how your family behaves in public, God only knows what happens behind closed doors. She will not be part of it." Doris shrieked, trying to salvage what was left. "Please don't do this. It was a misunderstanding." Her sequined gown glittered under the harsh lights, but all her shine had turned hollow. Frederick, still restrained by police, roared angrily, demanding they release him, but the sight of him in handcuffs only confirmed the fiancé's family's decision. Hunter dropped to his knees, pleading, "Please, just listen. It wasn't me. It was my father, my sister. Lena started all of this." His desperate words rang false in the ears of everyone who had seen what truly happened. No one was fooled. The bride's father shook his head, his voice final. "You are all toxic. We will not be connected to you, in any way." With that, the family gathered their things and walked out, the bride trailing behind them, her white gown dragging across the floor as if symbolizing the broken promise left in the wake of the chaos. Guests began to follow, leaving half-finished plates of food, spilled drinks, and shattered whispers behind. The band quietly packed up their instruments. The photographer sat in a corner, shaken, his tripod gone. The hall that had once been filled with applause and celebration now reeked of disgrace and humiliation. By the time the police escorted Frederick, Doris, and Hunter out in handcuffs, the once grand wedding had collapsed into a ghost of itself. The expensive decorations, the ice sculpture, the glittering chandeliers, they all stood as hollow monuments to a night that would be remembered not for love, but for violence and shame. Hunter, once the golden child, was left with nothing, no bride, no celebration, and no way to escape the truth. His wedding had ended not with vows, but with handcuffs, disgrace, and the sound of doors slamming shut behind the family that had once believed he was their pride. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Lucy's recovery was slow, her head wound, carefully monitored by doctors. Every time I looked at the scar hidden beneath her hair, I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak. Marcus and I spent sleepless nights at her bedside, whispering encouragement, telling her that she was brave, that she was loved. But outside the hospital walls, another battle was taking shape, the legal one. Charges were filed almost immediately. The evidence was overwhelming. The hospital reports, the photographs of Lucy's injury, the bruises on my own body, the testimony of dozens of witnesses, and even shaky cell phone videos that captured the moment Frederick brought the tripod down on my daughter. The state prosecutors wasted no time preparing the case. Frederick was charged with aggravated assault on a minor, a felony that carried years of prison time. Doris and Hunter were both charged with assault and battery for their attacks on me. When the trial finally began, the courthouse in Brookfield Hollow was packed. Neighbors, relatives, even strangers who had heard about the case filled the benches. The story had spread far beyond our small town. An extravagant wedding turned into a crime scene, a family torn apart by violence, a child injured by her own grandfather. Everyone wanted to see justice. I sat with Marcus on one side of the courtroom, Helen and Lucy beside us. Lucy clung to my arm, her head resting lightly against my shoulder, her presence a reminder of why I had to stay strong. Across the aisle sat Frederick, Doris, and Hunter, each flanked by their attorneys. Frederick looked older, angrier, his face hard and unrepentant. Doris wore a mask of indignation, whispering furiously to her lawyer. Hunter looked pale, nervous, his bravado stripped away. The prosecutor opened with a statement that sent chills down my spine. This case is about more than family conflict. It is about violence, premeditated, targeted violence, against a woman and her 12-year-old daughter. The defendants used their power, their anger, and their physical strength to humiliate and harm their own blood. And tonight, we will prove beyond any doubt that their actions were criminal, inexcusable, and deserving of the strictest punishment the law allows. Then came the evidence. First, the hospital records. Doctors testified about Lucy's head wound, the laceration, the stitches, the concussion she suffered, the risk of long-term trauma. They detailed my bruises, the swelling on my face from Doris's slap, the abrasions on my arms. Each medical record was projected on a screen, each photograph shown to the jury, leaving no room for doubt. Next came the witnesses. Guests from the wedding described what they saw, the shove, the slap, the moment Frederick wrenched the tripod from the cameraman and swung it down on Lucy. One guest, her voice trembling, said, "I'll never forget the sound when that tripod hit her head. It was like something broke inside me. No child should ever experience that." Even the bride's family testified. Her father, still furious, told the jury why he had broken off the engagement. "I will not let my daughter marry into violence. What I saw that night was barbaric. It was proof that this family cannot control their rage. They nearly killed that little girl. They deserve prison." The most powerful moment came when the videos were played. Grainy, shaky footage captured the horror in real time. The push, the slap, and finally, Frederick's brutal swing. Gasps filled the courtroom as the video showed Lucy crumpling to the ground, her scream cutting through the speakers. Doris covered her face. Hunter dropped his eyes. But Frederick stared defiantly, as though daring anyone to challenge him. The defense tried to twist the story. Frederick's lawyer claimed he had lost his temper in the heat of the moment. Doris's attorney insisted she had only meant to discipline me. Hunter's defense painted him as a victim of family tensions. But the jury wasn't fooled. The evidence was too clear, the violence too undeniable. When it was finally my turn to testify, I stood before the court, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I recounted the years of neglect, the favoritism, the humiliation at my own wedding, the insults, the shove, the slap, and the horror of watching my daughter struck down in front of 100 people. I can forgive many things, I said, my voice breaking, but I cannot forgive what they did to Lucy. She is 12 years old. She is a child. And no child should ever suffer violence at the hands of her own family. Lucy spoke too, softly but bravely, telling the jury how scared she had been, how much it hurt, how she still had nightmares. Her words brought tears to nearly everyone in the room. When the jury returned, the verdicts were unanimous. Frederick was found guilty of aggravated assault on a minor and sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with no chance of parole for at least 8. Doris was found guilty of battery and sentenced to 3 years in prison, her pleas for leniency ignored. Hunter was convicted of assault and given 5 years, his arrogance replaced by the hollow look of a man who had lost everything. As the judge delivered the sentences, the courtroom was silent. The gavel struck, and for the first time in my life, I felt something close to peace. My parents and brother had taken so much from me, but now the law had taken their power away. They were let out in handcuffs, their heads lowered. I held Lucy close, her small body pressed against mine, and whispered, "It's over now. They can't hurt us anymore." And though I knew the scars, both hers and mine, would never fully disappear, I also knew this. Justice had been served. Life after the trial felt strangely quiet at first. The whirlwind of court dates, testimony, and the crushing weight of facing my parents and brother every day in the courtroom had ended with the bang of the judge's gavel. For the first time in years, there were no more hearings, no more urgent phone calls from lawyers, no more dread of seeing Frederick's rage-filled eyes or Doris's sneer. They were behind bars now, and the silence left in their absence was not emptiness, it was freedom. Back at home, our little family slowly began to heal. Marcus, as always, was my anchor. Every morning, he would bring me coffee and remind me, "We're okay. We're safe now." Helen stayed close too, her presence a comfort I will never stop being grateful for. She became even more of a grandmother to Lucy during those weeks, filling our house with warmth, cooking her favorite meals, and sitting beside her while she did homework, making sure she felt safe and loved. Lucy's recovery was not easy. The wound on her head had left a scar, a faint line hidden beneath her hair, but the doctors were optimistic. "She's young and strong," one physician told us. "She'll heal physically, though the emotional recovery will take time." And he was right. Lucy had nightmares for weeks. Sometimes she would wake up crying, clinging to me, whispering, "Don't let them hurt me again, Mom." Each time, I would hold her until she fell asleep, whispering the same promise. "Never again, baby. They will never touch you again." Slowly, though, the light began to return to her eyes. With therapy, encouragement, and the unshakable love around her, Lucy regained her confidence. She went back to school, hesitant at first, but soon she was raising her hand in class again, laughing with friends, and pouring herself into her love for reading and art. Several months later, she entered a regional school competition for creative writing. She worked tirelessly on her essay, scribbling drafts late into the night, Helen sitting beside her, Marcus proofreading her work, and me cheering her on every step of the way. When the day of the awards ceremony arrived, Lucy stood on the stage in front of a packed auditorium. Her hair neatly brushed, her dress simple but lovely. And then they called her name. Lucy had won first place. I felt tears streaming down my face as she walked across the stage, her smile bright and proud, clutching her certificate. The audience clapped, and I clapped louder than anyone. Marcus had his arm wrapped around my shoulders, beaming, while Helen cried openly beside us. It wasn't just an award, it was proof. Proof that Lucy had survived, that she was thriving, that the violence and cruelty of that night hadn't broken her spirit. When she turned toward us, holding up her certificate, I realized I was crying not from sadness, but from joy. For so long, I had wondered if the scars would overshadow her childhood. But in that moment, I saw clearly. She was stronger than all of it. Later that night, back at home, Lucy curled up beside me on the couch, resting her head against my shoulder. "Mom," she said softly, "I wasn't scared today. I thought I would be standing in front of all those people. But I wasn't. I felt strong." "You are strong," I told her, kissing her hair. "You're stronger than anyone I know." And in the quiet that followed, I thought about everything we had endured. The neglect, the favoritism, the humiliation, the violence. Frederick, Doris, and Hunter had tried to silence me my whole life, to remind me that I didn't matter. They had tried to humiliate me at my wedding, to overshadow my daughter's existence, to crush us with their cruelty. But in the end, it hadn't worked. We were here. We were safe. We were free. I walked to the window and looked out over the lights of Brookfield Hollow, reflecting on the long, painful journey that had brought me here. For so many years, I had believed my voice didn't matter, that no one would listen. But when the moment came, I had spoken up. And the truth, backed by courage and evidence, had been louder than their lies. They tried to silence me. I whispered to myself. But in the end, truth and justice spoke louder. The words rang in my heart like a final chapter closing. The pain of the past would never fully disappear, but it no longer controlled me. I wasn't a forgotten daughter anymore. I was a mother, a wife, a survivor, and now, finally, I was free to live without fear. Marcus came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. I leaned back against him, a small smile forming on my lips. "About how far we've come. About how nothing they did could stop us." He kissed the side of my head. "And about how far we'll still go," he added. I glanced back at Lucy, who had dozed off peacefully with her certificate still clutched in her hand, and Helen humming quietly as she folded laundry nearby. My heart swelled with gratitude. This was my family. This was love. This was home. And for the first time in my 33 years, I felt whole. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means so much. Remember to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories every day.